Jim, welcome to the show. I'm delighted to get you here. Another, one of those ones that like we kind of connect online and meet there, get on a great little phone call, and here we are now about to record another episode. Thanks for coming,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, my pleasure, Alex. Thanks for having me.
As I like to, typically joke at the beginning of my podcast, I always say that I have a habit of like botching and underselling introductions of my guests. So if you wouldn't mind, you want to tell us a bit about yourself, who you
Yeah.
are, what you do, and most importantly, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. Well, again, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for having me on the show. It's looking forward to the conversation. Yeah, I mean, my name's Jim. I've been in operations in restaurants forever. I kind of joke with people that I was that kid whose parents taught them to open beer and wine when I was like 10 so that I could help serve their Christmas party. So I mean, I got into hospitality really, really early, and just kind of carried on from there. So into restaurants when I was in high school, and those were some of my first jobs. And then I started getting into management and stuff. Basically right in the middle of university, and never left. I did a. I was with a big corporate group. I live in Western Canada. I live in Vancouver, and so I was with this big Canadian restaurant group for almost 21 years, right up
Yeah.
until when the pandemic happened. And I was for lack of a better term, a casualty of the pandemic, but a voluntary casualty. I decided that it was time to move on and do something different, and I just wanted to try to help the industry.
Yeah.
Right? I saw that it was so difficult, and there were so many moving parts going on, and so many different things that, I mean, not that I had the answers, but I just had an urge to help. So I got into doing sort of, for lack, again, I use this term loosely, because our industry hates consultants, but I got into consulting by accident.
By
I
accident,
left
no less.
my Yeah, I left my corporate role and thought I had some ideas and some skills and some knowledge, and knew I wanted to help, but didn't know what that looked like. And I fell into consulting because people that were in my network just said, "Hey, like, I could use some help. Do you know anything about this?" So
Yeah.
I sort of learned the hard way what entrepreneurship and consulting kind of at the same time looked like. But fast forward now to now, we've been in business about 4 years. So Benchmark 60 is the brand that we've built. We're one of the leading advisory firms in the Canadian market. We operate lots in the US and a little bit in the UK. And we focus predominantly on helping restaurant operations teams understand how things like business productivity affect their
Yeah.
business model, how they can negate rising costs without raising prices. And we help them also understand how things like employee workload affect team well-being, mental health, burnout, turnover, those types of things. So we're very data-driven and really specific on that work that we do with restaurant groups to help them be more profitable and improve the employee experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, like to your point, I think COVID was such a great inflection point for, I think, people like you that were kind of dipping your toe into like consulting almost,
Mhm.
that like, everybody needed a hand in terms of like, oh, we got to refocus. It's a brave new world out there. And like what were the two main impacts of COVID? It was like inflation of commodity prices, and it was hiring costs. Like both of those completely upended, I guess, depending on who you ask today. Inflation is
Yeah.
on food is kind of like, well, it's fine, or it's like crazy, depending on who you ask. And then when it comes to hiring, I
Mhm.
mean, go on, give us your take on hiring
Well,
today.
it's. I was actually
On a
just
hiring
talking to
podcast.
somebody about. Yeah, I was actually just talking to somebody about this the other day. I mean, it depends on the market. It depends on
Yeah.
the position you're looking for. It depends on the concept or whatnot. But I think it's getting a little bit easier, but it's not getting less complicated. There are more
Interesting.
people, in my experience, in most of the markets we operate in, and even for our own business, we also operate a restaurant. It's getting easier, but I find that it's it's becoming, you have to be more specific about what it is that you're looking for in people than you used to, because I think in a lot of cases concepts are getting to be more and more specific as the markets get more challenging.
Okay, that's interesting because I've never heard anybody say that or articulate that in such a way. When you said like be more specific, give me an example there.
Well, I think pre-pandemic was one thing, but for the last few years, because of the how tight the labor markets have been, in not every market maybe, but in lots and most that we operate in, if I was looking for a general manager, I would hire almost anybody who had general manager or close to general manager level experience, because it was so hard to find people, right? We just want to make sure the roles are filled.
Yeah.
Whereas now we're finding a lot that there are, there's new and exciting concepts coming up. There's new, things, different technology that's coming into the marketplace. There's, new food and beverage trends, as there always are. But I think people they're starting to find that they're being more selective and picky and specific about the exact type of individual that they're looking for. And I mean, we just went through this in our concept that's fairly high end, French, and a small space. We wanted somebody who we didn't care if they had a really strong P&L acumen, for example. We didn't necessarily need them to be able to manage a 400 seat restaurant or multi locations. We wanted someone who was very strong in food and beverage and really cared about people.
Interesting, because I hear this a lot from people. I mean, obviously, what with it being a hiring pod, and it's like identifying talent is a big part of everything I talk about on this show.
Yeah.
But like one of the things is like, service can be taught. Like you teach somebody the floor plan, you teach somebody the P&L, you can give somebody like online training for financial analysis. You can do those things, but can you train somebody to be a gregarious person? Can you train them to be a host? Can you train them to like see the trash in the corner and immediately pick it up before anybody else sees it? I had a great guest on the podcast a while back. He's the COO of Goodberry's Creamery. And he was telling me a great anecdote of his time. He was very early in Darden. And he said he met Bill Darden in the bathroom of one of the restaurants. And he went up to the mirror. Bill Darden went up to the mirror, like wet a napkin and cleaned the mirror and turned around to him and said, "See how easy that was?" And he was like, that was like the moment that he was like, wow, that's like the level of kind of attention to detail service that obviously separates good from great when it comes to like hiring for really good GMs. Yeah. And it's not really something you can kind of coach, or you can kind of see, or like you can kind of be like almost like it has to be like mentored into people if it's not already innate within inside them. So how do you go about it? I'm not sure if that anecdote resonates. I see you nodding, so I'm like,
yeah, for sure. Well, I'm thinking about I'm thinking about a lesson that I learned in that exact same type of way with the executive vice president of the group that I worked for, like I said, for about 20 years. And he just happened to live in the community that the restaurant that I ran was in the community he lived in. Excuse me. And he used to show up at the restaurant almost every Friday at about 7:00. And this is an executive that has an office in in this big office tower downtown. Right? He'd show up at the restaurant and walk the floor. And I remember asking him, for the first few weeks he did it, everyone was terrified and nervous and why is he here? And then, we get to know each other a little bit better, and we started to wonder, why is he here on Friday at 7:00? You'd think maybe he would want to be home and with his family or have dinner or whatever that might be. So eventually one day I asked him, I said, "Why are you here every Friday? Do you not trust us, or are we not doing a good job?" And I'll never forget the conversation. He looked me in the eye and he said, "If you think for a second that office that I sit in all day, Monday to Friday, is why we're here, you've got it backwards. I'm the staff and the customers are why we're in this business. So I want to come spend time with them." And immediately, right away I went, "Oh yeah, okay, totally get it." But how that's resonated with me in terms of, my career experiences, let's not get stuck sitting in a booth all day working on a laptop.
As I sit in a booth.
As I sit in my office, right? But, we see as the industry has been evolving and more technology and, scheduling apps and all these things, that management gets stuck doing that sometimes. But why they're really in the business is because of people.
Totally. And I guess, like when you're looking to identify talent, then like, how do you go about looking for that kind of a story in a certain type of person?
Yeah, well, we were just going through this process, interviewing people for the restaurant, and I actually did meet some people who, when I asked them, what are you great at, or what are your skills, or some of those types of questions, a lot of times they said, I'm like the most organized. I can write at the best schedule. I'm so good at technology. I can do inventory really well. All those things are important. But what I wanted to hear was, I want to spend time with my team, and I want to develop people, and I want to say thank you to guests and spend time with them and take good care of them and be hospitable and those types of things. Right. So, that's my sort of personal stance on it, but the industry's shifting in a unique way that way, right? Because there is so much technology and so many platforms to spend time on.
Well, in that case, I mean, that's a good point. Like, I mean, when you're looking for great GMs, like, you know, there's such a dearth of GMs. I would say in North America, given you're like probably my first Canadian guest, but I would imagine it's the same thing up there. And
Yeah.
I know you obviously do a lot of work in the United States as well. So like,
Mhm,
all the time.
mhm, mhm.
But, you know, one of like, I definitely get the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the role of the GM is now this multifaceted, like Swiss Army knife, where you need to understand P&L, you need to understand data, you need to be
Yeah.
like an amazing gregarious person, you need to be like an operator. Like there are, if you ask somebody about P&L and data like 10 years ago, that would have been a nice to haves at the very best. You know what I mean? Now it's
Mhm.
like almost like requirements to be so competent in those skills.
Yeah, and I think the Benchmark 60 team, we have kind of a unique stance on this and position on this
Here
because
for it.
I really believe that the skills of the GM and the chef de cuisine, whoever it might be, are more the more important parts are, do they understand how to impact the things that well, do they know how to work with the things that impact the result? For example, if
Yeah.
I want to improve labor cost, do I know how to impact productivity? Do I know how to train my people to sell better? Do I know how to, you know, improve, reduce overtime? Those types of things. Because just telling, you know, and our industry has been guilty of this for a long time, and I'm biased on this, you know, a little bit, but to just tell the manager labor cost is too high, you need to lower it. Well, if they're not in charge of things like the pricing model or the wage structure, the only way they can impact it is by working harder or working
Yeah.
longer or filling someone else's role. And that's not sustainable.
Totally. And I mean, it wasn't sustainable before COVID as well,
It
you
wasn't.
know, and now there's an extreme hiring shortage across the board. Like we're getting to like full capacity is like just like almost, I don't want to say pie in the sky because lots of companies are getting there, but like, you know, for a lot of people getting to full capacity, full hiring is like as far away now as it's probably ever been before. Like,
For sure. Yeah.
so when it comes to like workload, which is one of the kind of core tenets of like, you know, benchmark 60, for example, like if you're a
Mhm.
business, like how do you go around even like explaining the concept of workload? Because my
Yeah.
take, if you want to hear it, is like,
Let's hear
you
it.
know, like it's a real like your parents back in my day, you know, I've grafted, so you have to graft, you know what I mean? And it's like this sort of perpetuation of like this sort of relatively toxic sort of behavior, which is like, you know, working hard, working smart. Like if you're going to work 80
Mhm.
hours in a week when you're paid for 40 hours, like
Mhm.
that is kind of toxic, you know, no matter what.
For
It's
sure it
like,
is.
but it very much reminds me of like, you know, back in my day sort of argument, you know, and so like,
Yeah.
you know, you're obviously dealing with people who've graduated up the ranks and there is like a survivor bias, as they say, you know, so like, I'm curious what, like, how do you like kind of pitch, how do you preach the concept of like workload as part of a core concept of your
Yeah.
business?
We used a lot of sport analogy,
Go on.
partly
Like
because
Canadian
I grew
sports?
up playing lots of sports. What's that?
Canadian sports?
Any sports.
Okay, I'm here for it. Hit me.
Um, I mean, the NBA is the most, you know, vocal about this type of thing. But the NFL, the NHL, I mean, um, there's lots of different sort of connection points. So if I told you that the NBA, I wouldn't have to tell you. People probably, anyone who's a sports fan knows something about some of this, or they've heard of some of it. Most professional sport leagues have a load management strategy in place to protect their athletes from burnout and injury.
Okay.
Right? If I mean Kawhi Leonard, for example, is the king of load management in the NBA. For anybody who, I mean, he only plays a certain amount of games because he's so, you know, they're so on top of it. But every pro sport, they're going to pay attention to everything from nutrition to practice time to weight
Yeah.
training to all of those things because they want their athletes to be able to perform on the field or in the game,
Yeah.
right? So we take that same approach from a data perspective, and we can actually measure how hard the team has to work in a restaurant in order to achieve sales, profit, labor cost, all those different things.
Ah, okay. Interesting. So you
Because
created metrics.
if we work them too hard, we're going to put them at risk of air quotes burnout or injury.
Yeah.
Injury being sometimes physical, but typically it's mental in the restaurant space.
Very interesting. So do you like have metrics that you look to measure, like to be able to like
Well,
analyze those sort of like marginal gains, so to speak, you know, to use
yeah,
in our sporting
yeah.
phrase?
So a lot of restaurants would look at things like sales per labor hour. Some of them might look at covers per labor hour as well in the front of house,
Yeah.
maybe. We encourage restaurants to look at covers per labor hour in the front of house, sales per labor hour in the back of house for lots of different reasons. But those are productivity metrics, right? Those are helping
Okay.
us understand how productive the overall business is or one department,
Yeah.
right? So, but there's interesting sort of connectivity pieces of information there. So, an
Yep.
example would be if I'm trying to achieve, if I'm a restaurant that measures sales per labor hour, for example, or covers per labor hour,
Yep.
and I find that maybe wages are going up or that profitability is an issue, I might try to challenge the team to increase covers per labor hour to a certain point in order to negate rising cost, right?
Okay.
But what we see happen all the time is there's an invisible threshold there where all of a sudden you go from positive levels of productivity to unsustainable workload.
Okay. So there's like an inflection point you hit
We're
by
too
over optimizing.
productive, and it
Yeah.
means that I'm spread too thin. Now I can't handle what's going on. And the connection points that we see to that are things like higher levels of people calling in sick, lower declining customer spend,
Because people are what,
higher
racing
levels of
around
turnover.
tables
Yeah,
kind
so
of thing.
the customer version of that, which I'm sure you've experienced and I have too. We're in a restaurant, we're sitting there having dinner. Someone in our group said, we're starting to wind down. Someone in our group says, should we have dessert or maybe another round of drinks? And somebody else in the group responds with, well, we haven't seen the server in 15 minutes, so maybe
I
we'll
see. I
just
see.
go
I see.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
We would have spent more, but we can't because there's no one there to take our order.
Yeah.
That's a really common example that we see of places that are running at a sort of unhealthy workload level,
Yeah.
and it's actually impacting their customer spend in a negative way.
Interesting. Interesting. I mean, I interrupted you with that comment, so you had a third point. You had a third bullet you were mentioning as well.
Yeah, just kind of along the same lines of those pieces of those connection points is things like I said, declining customer spend, increasing levels of sick calls, and higher levels of turnover, because there's a burnout factor there, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes, the argument that we hear as well, a lot of turnover happens because of maybe toxic management or poor training or those things. Sure, that's totally a part of the equation, but the
Yeah.
workload piece is something that is definitely. It's right there. It's front and center. It's just a matter of understanding how to look at that information.
Well, that was exactly what I was going to say. So, when you work with a restaurant, I mean, I would say restaurants not necessarily the most famously technologically forward or data-driven sort of
Right.
businesses or industry in and of
Yep.
itself, or, kind of, I would say like, that's kind of I don't want to be insulting to the industry either, but you know what I mean? In the sense that like, not everyone has like a CDP, for
Sure.
example, to like,
Yeah.
and so when we think about this kind of data, like if a restaurant operator was listening to this, like, I mean, what do they even need to do to even figure out how to even start like tracking this?
Well, so the simplest
Besides calling
version,
you.
yeah, call us anytime. Excuse me. The simplest version that we always start with restaurants, or we encourage people to look at and think about, is this concept of covers per labor hour, right? Because it's just a simple ratio that is telling us how many customers are being served on average based on the number of employees that are working.
Yeah.
Right. It's quite simple, but they'll be able to immediately see if I understand my cover count in a restaurant, I understand my employee hours, and also I have an idea of what the payroll amount is or my average employee wage, and I understand the sales that we're doing or the average customer spend. Those are the pieces that go into labor cost.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the customer spend and the cover count. That's how we get to sales. The average employee wage and the hours is how we get to the payroll amount. So if I know those four pieces of data, I can quite simply understand covers per labor hour is X. If it goes up a little bit, my labor cost will come down a little bit. Right? If it goes up a whole bunch more, my labor cost might drop dramatically. But they can start to understand, okay, if I just measure covers per labor hour every day, there's a really interesting thing that we see happen all the time. Again, covers per labor hour is it's a measurement of productivity, right? Thursday and Friday and Saturday nights in restaurants, I would say as high as maybe 80% of the time, are the three least productive shifts in most restaurants we see.
Least productive. Now that's
Least.
a spicy insight. Tell me why.
Least.
Because in my head, they're like the most popular times, busiest times. So like there's obviously a disconnect here.
Totally. If you think about how most customers behave on a Monday night versus a Friday night, what do they do differently? They probably might drink more. Right?
Society would hope.
Society. They might drink more, or they might be celebrating more, or they might have they behave a little bit differently. Hopefully the drink comment wasn't inappropriate, but they might behave differently, right? So quite often we see the average guest spend is higher on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night than it might be on a Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday night.
Makes sense.
So what the mistake that we see happen quite often, or the opportunity that we see quite often, is that if I'm the schedule writer in the restaurant and I'm looking at scheduling based on revenue, I might schedule more people on Friday night unnecessarily because the sales number is higher. So I throw people at it, which if from a ratio perspective, if we just, let's say we need 5, or we want the restaurant to operate at 5 covers per labor hour consistently, what we see happen is that it operates at 5 covers labor on Monday night and 3.5 on Friday.
Interesting.
But labor cost looks good because sales are strong.
Yeah, that masks the efficiency, basically, is what you're saying. And so, like, this is again areas where the restaurant can eke out more performance and more like bang for their buck, so to speak, from employees without having to like completely burn them out as well. Like understanding like the output per dollar. It's actually kind of amazing. I mean, do you think that you hit on something here, or is this just like one of those kind of unknown knowns in the industry?
I think, and again, I'm biased on this, right? Because we do this every day. But so, I mean, I believe that there are lots of restaurants, lots of very smart restaurant operators, and lots of them look at this covers per labor hour or sales per labor hour number. They look at it and they have a good level of understanding, and they look at their labor model religiously.
Yeah.
What the opportunity is, I believe, is to understand better how the two of them work together. So,
so why is there a disconnect then? Why do you see a disconnect in this?
Because I just don't think it's something that the industry or the operators have done much of in the past, is looking at both of those things in tandem. They'll look at sales per labor hour in the kitchen and say, hey, that sales per labor hour number was really strong, but labor cost wasn't very good, so push harder. But maybe they don't understand that the labor cost was only high because people worked overtime, so average wage was higher.
Okay, I see.
Right? There's moving parts to those things and so compartmentalizing that data is really, really important, and there's incredible opportunity there. So that's why when we say we can help to, and we do this all the time, we can help to lower labor costs and dramatically improve retention, is because if we can find a 5% improvement on overall average productivity in the restaurant space, but we can also eliminate some of that unhealthy workload scenario, we're going to accomplish both of those at the same time. Because I mentioned Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night are, the least productive. Well, the most productive or unhealthy levels of productivity in most restaurants we look at, Sunday during the day.
Why do they like purposely like understaff them? And
well, I don't think it's on purpose. But again, looking at that data, what do people do on Sundays during the day that they might not do on Friday night? They probably, in a lot of cases, just spend less.
Yeah.
They have tea,
like a Sunday lunch with the family or something.
Right. Yeah. And so the revenue number doesn't look as good. And so the manager writing the schedule, to no fault of their own, schedules less people, thinking, oh, we're only going to do $4,000 in sales instead of 10. I only need half the people. They might still be serving the same number of guests. They're just not spending as much.
I'm very like intrigued by this. I have to say, I think you kind of cracked a nut in my mind, so to speak, because like, I mean, I talk about hiring, let's say 80% of the episodes I've been on. Mm-hmm. And I'm by no means an expert in hospitality. I'm merely a simple podcast host. and if I'm lucky to even call myself that. Got a new mic.
I think you're doing all right.
And but I think about that because it's like, it's not really been raised as a sort of metric that's like alarming to me, in the sense that like I ask people about metrics, I ask them like, how to think about optimizing hiring, anything about optimizing retention. And I don't ever hear of this ratio. And like, I'm pretty fascinated by it. Like, I have to say, like, when you talk about like material impact on business, is there any example that you can give that like you're free to speak to, so to speak?
Dollar value wise?
Well, like in the sense, like a client that you worked with that implemented this or like learned about this through you and saw material impact on
Yeah.
their business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can definitely share my personal experience of, I mean,
Your personal experience.
this,
Yeah.
this strategy, whatnot, it literally changed my entire career.
Wow.
So I was in corporate operations, like I mentioned, right? I was with this group for a long time. I was overseeing, for about 5 years, all I did was new business development, new openings, right? Across the country, find a location, build the team, do the whole thing. And openings are exhausting for anyone who's ever done them.
Yeah.
There's an unhealthy workload level there for sure.
Yeah.
But that's for maybe episode 2. In Western Canada around 2015, there was this sort of 2014, this race to $15 an hour happening. There's no, for any of the American or US listeners that you have, there's no tip credit in Canada.
Yeah.
So there's no pay people $2 an hour, pay people $7 an hour, whatever it might be. If you work the busiest section on Friday night and sell $2,000, you still make, right now, the wage in the city I live in is $17 an hour. So we were seeing this, up to 30% increase in average wage over a year span. We were getting 25, 35, 50 cents every 90 days in increase in wage.
Because of the law.
The law.
Yeah.
And we were going, this is unsustainable. We can't do this. We were looking at it saying, we're at a pricing threshold where we can't charge more for our product, which the industry is feeling right now.
Yep.
And we were saying, we don't want to have to change our service model. And what we meant by that was we don't want to run with less staff. We feel good about the experience we're providing.
Yeah.
So we're stuck, right? Can't charge more, can't cut harder. So we thought we have to find ways to look at this model differently. And so we went out and we recruited analysts from all kinds of industries that were looking at data differently.
Yeah. Awesome.
Brought them in and said, let's build a task force internally. Let's look at this information differently. Let's start to find new ways to measure it. And the biggest learning, like I said, was that we realized how those two things, labor cost percentage and productivity metrics, work together. The first year that we implemented this across the company, 30 locations across the country, we spent $2.2 million more on front of house wages alone in 1 year than the year before. And our labor cost percentage stayed flat. It didn't go up. Part of that was because the businesses became more productive.
Yeah.
Part of that was we were able to improve customer average check in some spaces.
Yeah.
There was only menu price increases in one market.
Like, that's awesome. And I really hope when people hear this, that they take that part away, that macro pressure forced you to innovate on your own internal processes that ended up being an enormous unlock for you. Because
Absolutely.
I think part of it is it's very easy to blame COVID. It's very easy to blame in California, the FAST Act on this labor cost increase, this mandatory minimum wage, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When in actual fact, there's always areas to improve. You know what I mean? I think, even in my own job, I have an example that I tell my team, it's get to literally the bottom of the micro problem. Everything but the market is why this is wrong. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
We could always figure out on our own end all the little bits and bobs that go into giving you a result in something. And I think it's phenomenal that you're able to find a strategic edge inside of your own data, which I think is a story for lots of people in restaurants and hospitality, is that aha moment of them finding an edge within their data. Not everyone has that yet. Not everyone is kind of cracked it. Companies are growing, companies are investing an absolute shitload into CDPs and data and loyalty and everything else under the sun.
Yeah.
But there are still core metrics in your mind. And obviously workload and dollar.
Sure.
I'm going to butcher what it was. What you say, dollar per
sales per labor hour is one.
Sales per labor hour. Yeah.
And, that example that I gave is with a massive $400 million a year company, right? So there probably are people listening going, well, I have 2 restaurants, so good to know. But
good to know, bro.
what I always encourage people to think about and this doesn't cost anything. This is free for people to do. And call me, I'll help, whatever we can do to help. But if I said to an operator, start measuring that covers per labor hour thing, and then just think about how can you get a 5% improvement?
Yeah.
A 5% improvement. We do this all the time. The customer wouldn't notice. The employees wouldn't notice. It's just, there's low hanging fruit. Well, a 5% improvement in a restaurant that does $3 million a year in revenue is somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000 a year in opportunity.
Yeah.
Depending on wage and pricing structure, right? So we've had lots of conversation that you mentioned, that California thing. We've had so much conversation with operators where we've said to them, your restaurant maybe does 3 or 4 million a year in revenue, in quick serve, right? It just works in that space too.
Yeah.
If we could find a 5% improvement in productivity, that's $60,000, $70,000 a year in ways that you can negate rising cost. It might not cover all of it, but think about if you could, maybe you still have to increase your prices a little bit, but what if you could increase your prices 15% less than your competitors? There's a huge opportunity there.
Totally. And this is a thing, and speaking in dollars, not in percentages, absolute figures here, like you're able to indicate the material impact that these changes can make. It contextualizes to people, whoa, okay, I know what $60,000 is, 0 point whatever percent change in a number doesn't really mean anything to me. It's like abstract. And I think to a lot of people, no matter how smart you are, like a lot of when people talk in data, that's why nobody understood COVID. I think when we saw those charts every day, and so it is amazing to me to hear us talk about workload, us talk about staff in an extremely positive manner as well.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I always think about a lot is everyone refers to it as hiring cost, and referring to people as a cost, in the sense that that's how expensive it is to employ someone. But I'll tell you what else is expensive? Hiring them. What else is expensive? What has a payoff is retaining them, investing in them.
Absolutely.
And it's people talk about assets and liabilities, on a P&L, as in, I think about the cost of labor, and it's understanding workload and how far you can push them. And I loved your analogy. Kawhi Leonard, I'll let you slide on the Kawhi Leonard sort of reference there, but
that's okay.
All right, Kawhi. But the analogy makes sense. As a listener and as me kind of just hearing you out here, why do you think LeBron James, not that I'm a LeBron fan, but doesn't he famously spend $1 million a year on physiotherapy or something crazy like that? You know what I mean? As in getting his body prime, and he's 39 years old now? Is he 40?
Yeah. I don't think he's hit 40 yet. I think he's 39.
I don't think he's hit 40. I think we'd know.
Yeah. It's, so much of it is the investment part is huge, but just protecting people from, take the LeBron James. How many minutes does he play every night? They don't let him play because they want to be able to keep him on the floor. Right.
Yeah.
And he's at the right times.
Yeah. At the right
so
times.
It's the, your comment about the retention side of things and the turnover and the cost of hiring. So if, let's say we've got a restaurant that, they have 50 employees and they have to replace 100% of them every year. And what's the latest stat? $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to hire somebody? Who knows, right? Depending on the position. They might be spending $100,000 a year in hiring and onboarding cost.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mentioned that improved productivity by 5% can give you a dollar value. That's a pretty good opportunity. Well, there's also the opposite of that, where if we find that the restaurant is operating at a too productive, right, in that unhealthy workload, if we can reduce workload by 5%, we know that the connection points are things like increase average customer spend, lower level of sick calls, lower level of turnover. We might reduce turnover by 10%. Well, that's a big number when you start to add that up too.
If we're calling people a cost, there's no bigger cost than churning out people you've invested in. Right. I think about that a lot, and, for any skeptical Sally, so to speak, listening to this, okay, and it's bad employees, we just want the best for our restaurant, and it's obviously nobody kind of sounds like a 1940s kind of villain from a movie, you know what I mean? But in the sense, people are normal. But in the sense that when I think about it, reducing that workload percentage by 5%, okay, and unlocking performance gains, correlated gains in, say, churn, you know, in terms of like dollar value. How do you go about helping a restaurant business like understand that correlation? Like you work with them on an engagement for 6 months, for example. Like how do they get to the point of going, boom, yeah, that worked?
Yeah, it to be honest, it really depends on the
Yeah.
engagement. I mean, and I'll give two different examples. A larger group right now that we're spending quite a bit of time with, they have 46 locations. Okay. They
Yep.
have some locations that there are financial performance issues. They don't manage labor costs well.
Yeah.
So we're going to work with them to help them improve the level of productivity in the business so they can negate some of that labor cost, right? Improve that result. But there's other locations that there's one that has 230% annual turnover. So we're going to focus more with them on the workload side of things to help them understand what's going on. So if we were to, you know, we don't have images to share on the screen right now, but what we see happen in those types of locations is this productivity, if you look at it day to day, goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And so what we're trying to help them accomplish is more consistent levels of workload so that the employee has a better experience. You know, there's ways that we can do that. So that's, you know, and we're going to work with that company because they have so many locations. It's a 2-year project to get through all of those businesses and from an education perspective.
Well, that's exactly it. Okay, you just touched on it. It's like the education bit. You know, it's a whole way of understanding people within the industry, like the hourly worker on the floor, in the back of the house, all the way up to GM. Like we've had a radical change, like radical
Very.
perception change of this frontline worker within the restaurant since COVID, you know, and
100%.
it's an insane, I don't like the word, it's in challenge for everyone. Like, doesn't matter if you're like 1,000 location and you're one of the most profitable businesses, everyone is stuck in mired and mud in the challenge of solving their hiring crisis and putting
100%.
people to work.
Yep.
And if some are doing it well, some are not, and some don't have a clue. And I see it across the board. Like you read it online, you can read NRN, you read QSR, you know, listen to my podcast. You know, there's all these different places, but like fundamentally, like the pendulum has shifted. Like I posted yesterday, I had a guest, Eric Gabrowitz. I'm gonna butcher his name. Sorry, Eric. And he's you know, the founders of Tupelo Honey in North Carolina.
Oh yeah. And
yeah, great guy, absolute gent. Posted him yesterday, but I remember he said something really interesting. We were talking about benefits, and he was like, I was raised in the kitchen, like I'm a chef, you know. It's like didn't have any of this when I was coming up, like as in talk of benefits, let alone receiving benefits, but like the talk of them. But like they are competitive capital now, like they're table stakes. Like I was like, what innovative things are you doing over there with your benefits? And he was like, pet insurance. And I was like, pet insurance. And he goes, man, they're going gaga for pet insurance. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. But it's also fascinating that like you, like company, like restaurants now have to think outside the box to like get to table stakes. You know, like obviously, I mean, it goes without saying that like career paths and training are what everyone needs to do. I mean, if you want to really retain your best staff, like you got to give them career paths and you got to like give them like great training and like objective leadership. But like, I mean, you're nodding and I feel like I'm doing the talking now, but
no, you're reminding me of the pet insurance thing. The coolest project that we worked on in the last 3 years was an operator of an 8-unit restaurant group in the Northeast US called us and said, we have a problem. I said, okay. He goes, we want to spend money to keep our people happy and retain them. We want to invest. We're just worried about the impact on our bottom line. So we said, you know, started having a conversation. What is it that you want to do? He wanted to provide at-home cleaning and service for every hourly employee that works in his company.
Would love that.
Because he knew how hard his team was having to work. They were spread a little bit thin. They're all, let's say, 20 to 30 years old. You know, they're a certain age and demographic. And there was one scenario that happened where he walked into one of the restaurants in the morning and there was an hourly employee and his uniform was kind of wrinkled and had some stains on it. And he was like, hey, what's going on with your uniform? And the kid looked at him and said, we're short-staffed. I closed last night. I opened today. I didn't have time to do laundry. I'm here. Like, what more do you want?
Yeah.
So he said, we're going to provide at-home cleaning and laundry service 1 day a week. We're going to send a maid or whatever you want to call it to every employee's house.
Yep.
But that's a big investment. It was a couple $100,000 a year. So we went into that project saying, okay, if we can improve overall business productivity across all locations by X, we can negate that rising cost.
Like, that's amazing. And and it comes back to that point again, which is like, how do you correlate the impact of an initiative like that with direct bottom line?
Totally.
Like, because like the restaurant owner, like clearly is like a proud man, comes in and you see this guy with like, I don't know, like an ice cream stain or whatever it is that was like on the shirt, and you're like, literally, what the? And so, because of course you would, like, and it's like, take a walk in your employee's shoes. That guy closed the night before, was in for the open, you know what I mean? Like, as in ludicrous amount of effort to come and do that, like really like invested. It's like, and the response is so natural, like, what more do you want from me? Like,
right.
I actually had that benefit when I was at home cleaning in my one of my jobs where before COVID it was like remote, because the company was kind of remote, so they gave everybody who was in office the remote benefit, and then everybody remote got the in-off benefits. So you got like a lunch voucher instead of free lunch, back when tech companies used to give free lunch.
Yeah. Well, and from a hiring perspective, think about that from a recruiting perspective. I'm a 21-year-old guy that doesn't want to do laundry or clean my house. I'm going to tell all my friends that this company that I work for does it for me.
Totally. I mean, like, benefits matter. People talk about benefits. That's why we're like laughing about the pet insurance. I mean, I'd never heard of it as an offer. I've had other people talk to me about 401ks, getting in on a 401k immediately, even if you're an hourly worker, not waiting 6, 9, 12 months of being there. Like, there's all these caveats, and companies are competing. But like, at the end of the day, nothing beats a well-fostered, great culture in any of these restaurants. And that starts from the top with the leadership, trickles down to a great GM, and, really buying into culture, really kind of, I mean, like, I hate, it's almost like I hate talking about Chick-fil-A in this example, because it's like, here we go, another example. But like, well-deserved. And I mean, they're also, objectively, they're an example at every conference we go to.
100%.
Yeah, and it's well earned. And like, they've trained their staff. They have like got such an operation. They're great at identifying talent, and they're great at retaining, their talent. I mean, it's amazing. And I think like more power to them. And I think like, they in that context, they should serve as a great like example for everyone. I think, like, one last things here, Jim, is like, when somebody's listening to this episode here, okay, and like the first thing I'm literally going to do, like me, if I was to like hear this podcast, was like, get open Google Sheets right now and literally create that like spreadsheet and start looking at that data. Like, I would pull it as CSV if it was in, I don't know, whatever tool they use, it's in your Toast or it's in your Block, Square, or whatever you want to use it. But like, get to work as fast as possible. I'd be like pulling that number out of here. Like, if somebody was listening to you here, how would you like say, this is what you got to do?
Well, I mean, they could do this on a napkin. It's easy.
Yeah.
Find out how many customers you're serving every week, what the cover count is.
Yep.
Find out how many employee hours you're using every week, and just covers divided by hours. Find out what that number is. And if you're, I would encourage them to look at 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, 4 weeks. Look at 4 weeks. And the thing that I guarantee in most cases will jump off the page is that number will be different every week. And that means that your employee is having a different experience every week. Your customer might be having a different experience every week. And if there's something you can do to just create more consistency in that number, it will improve business.
Oh, that's awesome.
There's a million ways you can go from there. We look at it by position, by day of the week, by hour, by department, by location, but chop it up 1,000 different ways. But just start there. Just go, what does 1 week versus the second week versus the next week versus the fourth week look like? And if it's not the same, there's opportunity.
Man, that's awesome. And it like really leans back into like our talking point. It's like data. Like, get out, measure what matters, measure what you can, get the right data. And like, to your point there, Jim, like, I mean, you can slice and dice it any way you want, but there are core fundamentals to it. Jim Taylor, you're an absolute legend. I will say this for everybody listening this far as well. Great website, great social media, which is how we kind of got in touch in the first place. I mean, you're really putting out great content out there, and super, super valuable. And I'm just delighted that you came on here and like literally, I feel like I went 12 rounds and survived. I feel like I'm Logan Paul and you're Floyd Mayweather, you know, like I'm the jokester, and you're like sports analogy. And you know, like you're like, because man, like honestly, I feel like I learned so much from this, and
thanks so
I
much.
can see why your clients love you, and really like, you know, you working with such big brands like 46 location brand you were mentioning. I mean, like no small fish there. Like that's awesome. And I clearly they trust your methodology, and I'm delighted you were able to share some of it with me, you know, very Seth Godin of you, you know, share some value and it will come back, you know.
We hope so, right? Just trying to help.
All right, man. You're a gent. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.